What is up, dads? Welcome to the Act a Dad podcast. My name is Mark Savant, and I am thrilled to bring you an awesome guest today. The guest with me today is the president and founder of the Father's Rights Movement. He's been working with dads for many, many years and helping dads get reconnected with their children. This is a really pervasive problem in our culture, in our society, and I cannot wait to get into some of the challenges and get his input on how we can be better. How can we get dads more involved in their kids' lives? So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Mr. Tom Fiddler.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I've been really looking forward to this interview, and I cannot wait. When I learned about the Father's Rights Movement and how big of an issue this actually is in our society, I said, I got to talk to Thomas. I got to get his feedback. So thanks again for coming on the show today.
Absolutely. It is a huge problem.
So let me start here by asking you, Thomas, do you have kids? How old are your kids, and how old are your kids? Let's start there.
So I have twins. I have one boy, one girl, and they're seniors in high school this year. They're both 18, graduating, and be heading off to college next year. So my time with the young ones are done, and I'm kind of we talked a little bit before the show. You've got a couple of young ones. I'm a little envious there. That's it goes so fast. It goes really quick. Take advantage of it.
Absolutely. It's so easy to get caught up in what's happening in the future and what's happened in the past, but you really just need to settle down and focus on the present. I agree with you 100%. It's very easy to forget about the present.
For sure.
So you've got two kids, twins, just about to graduate from high school. So take me back a little bit, Tom. Why did you decide to start the Father's Rights Movement, and how did you build it from just you to where we're at today with over 500,000 followers nationwide?
I really started off just as a place, kind of a blog to vent my emotions at the time. I was going through a divorce that was extremely unjust, and my children were being kept from me without due process. And I just, you grow up thinking that the courts are going to be fair and just, and that's what you go into the courts expecting. And then when you learn that they're not, that's a double blow on top of just them taking your kids. And it's and you think at first it's just me. This only happened to you. And that's where really things have changed, because there hasn't been any communities for fathers that have been separated and so forth. We got classified as deadbeats, and whenever you think of an absent father, you almost instantly think of a deadbeat, someone that doesn't want to be there. And I've learned that that's not the case, and more times than not, it's been they want to be there, but the courts and the mother who's upset at the time has kind of excluded them and forced them out. And it's a prevalent problem throughout the entire country. I don't think there's anybody in our country that hasn't been affected by divorce in one way or another.
Agreed. It's a huge problem, and I'm blessed. I am so blessed that I live in a household where I get to have a good relationship with my wife, and I get to see my children every day. And I think that it's very easy to take that for granted and just to think that's always going to be there, right? And from my interactions with fathers on both sides of this coin, you don't think about it until you're going through it, right? Yeah. Was that kind of what your experience was?
100%. I'm really glad that you asked that, and I'm glad to have met you too, because the fact that you're even doing a show like this is fantastic. Because I see the actual genuine interest from you in this movement and what's happening with us, and one of the questions I constantly ask is, how do we reach the masses that this hasn't happened to? Because I couldn't be reached myself. When the kids were 5, I had a real good friend that was going through divorce, and he didn't want to be an every other weekend dad, and it was really depressed, and it was really getting him down. And I felt sympathetic for him, but it wasn't a commonplace thing. That didn't happen anymore. I was just I didn't know why they were keeping him from him, but something must be up. And figured it was just an isolated event. Didn't even think twice about it. Really didn't give him nearly as much attention as he should have got from me. And so it definitely went right past me. I don't know how to get to the people like me back then that think that everything, the world, that the courts are fair and just is what we believe in. And I definitely did at that time.
Sure. And I think the power of social media it gives you that platform. It gives you that ability to say, okay, this is my blog. And then all of a sudden people start reaching out saying, wow, that message resonates with me. That message resonates with me. And so it's
Absolutely.
an extremely powerful way of getting your message out. Do you find that to be somewhat of a double-edged sword for dads? You're able to get the message out, but sometimes maybe it's not the right message. How do you
Yeah.
think that impacts fathers' rights movement?
There's no question it's a double-edged sword. The community wouldn't be here as strong as it is without social media. Fathers have been minimized and tossed out for decades, but they didn't ever have a community. There'd be small little groups, and they'd be crazies and nuts. They'd be just nuts and stuff like that, and they'd easily dismiss them. And I think, like, when you look at the other civil rights movements, you got blacks, you got the women. They could have their communities because they could just see who else is experiencing that same injustice right there. But you can walk down the street and another father, you have no idea whether he's experiencing the same things you are or not. So there's no visual connection there to know who's experiencing the same things you are. So that social media platform has built that to where we can connect in that manner. And it's when I was going through the divorce, it literally saved my life, and I know it saved other people's lives as well. It's just that connection when you make with somebody that actually understands and knows what you're feeling. I mean, on a true level, it's so strong. I mean, it gives you the strength to just almost, it'll turn you around. And it's I've seen it do it to a lot of people. It certainly did it to me, and I was able to bond with people that were across the country I'd never met before, and I could bond with them on a different level than I could bond with my mother, or my family, or best friends that had known me since I was a child. They knew me my whole life. They're definitely going to support me, but they didn't understand what I was going through, and that connection was huge. So that's the plus side. So then we all got together. Now we got 500,000 people, and we have 200 volunteers, and we're trying to change laws. And now we're communicating mostly through text, and a lot of miscommunications. I think I read somewhere that 80% of text is miscommunicated, and I fully believe that now. I don't think most people that I work with fully believe it, although some are starting to see it. But as a movement, we face a lot of things. That's the double-edged sword of the social media, is all that text back and forth between all these people, and they're projecting their emotions and so forth onto one another, and reading things that aren't there. The tone of the text, right? And so it's difficult in that. We've got other difficulties too, but that's the social media side of it that's rough.
Absolutely. And it is such an emotional topic. And just kind of going back to one of your earlier points, it's so emotional, but as men, it's kind of hard to actually express our emotions for whatever reason. It's hard for us to actually see other men, other dads that are suffering a problem like this, that aren't getting the chance to see their kids, because they're not really talking about it at the bar or at the baseball game,
Absolutely.
right? They're
Yep.
kind of suffering in silence, which to me is a really, it's a really, not just scary, but it's just a really horrible thing for the father and for the child, because everyone suffers when dad's not around, statistically.
Absolutely. And we've learned that the staying quiet has been ingrained. That's a social construct that's been ingrained into us from small childhood. When you got two children, they're both 2 years old or 3 years old, and the boy falls down, hits his knee or his elbow, and don't cry, carry on. The little girl you'll pick up, you'll coddle. And so, right from the very beginning, we're teaching them how to act differently in that regard.
So that's one of the things I really like about the fathers' rights movement, is you're giving dads, I hate to use the word safe space, but you're giving them a place to talk with other dads that are experiencing these problems.
Absolutely.
So with the fathers' rights movement, obviously people can find your website, fathersrightsmovement.us, or find you on Facebook, the Fathers' Rights Movement, but there's also a lot of local chapters as well.
Absolutely. And we're trying to develop those more. And some of them are strong, some of them are not so strong yet. But we are trying to get those local chapters more developed. That's really where everything takes place, is on the local level. If we can get it there, the what we call Central is our main page and our main group as an organization. But we want to start empowering the local groups, because that's where change is going to happen. Your legislative change is going to happen on a state level. It's also where you get face to face with other fathers and are able to offer more support than you can through the net.
Awesome. Very, very powerful. The fifth core principle of the Awesome Dad movement with
Mhm.
Act Dad is that you need to have community. You need to surround yourself
Yeah.
with like-minded people that have the same goals. So to have a movement, and look, I can't specialize in every, because our goal is to empower, support, and celebrate every dad worldwide.
Sure.
So it's just been so special for me to be able to team up with the fathers like yourself, Tom, and other members of the fathers' rights movement to be able to better understand this problem and also help guide people that I meet and talk
Yeah.
to and say, hey, you got to check out this guy in Mississippi or this guy in Texas or this.
Yeah.
It's just been really powerful.
Yeah.
So speaking of fathers' rights, a statistic that I believe you sent me, Thomas, is that I'm not exactly sure where I saw this, but statistically, 90% of dads after a divorce get every other weekend. Correct?
Um, I think it's more about 80%. Our movement has a tendency, well, same as all movements, kind of exaggerate or stretch them a little bit. I think we're closer to about 75, 80% of the real numbers there.
Okay. So
But it's a
70,
lot.
right. So we're looking at an astounding percentage of dads getting every other weekend or 4 days a month.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Is it because the dads are deadbeat? Is it because the deck is stacked against them? Like why is that happening?
So I almost, at one point I didn't think there were any deadbeat dads, or very few of them. We tend to relate to ourselves, right? All of us do. And so I related with myself, and I couldn't even imagine that there was deadbeat dads out there, but there are some that have no interest in being involved. But I think they're a relatively small percentage. In fact, I would think our gender does not dictate our obligation, responsibility, or our capability to nurture, to love, and so forth. So keeping that in mind, where the gender does not dictate those items, I would say that fathers and mothers probably walk from their children in the same ratios, roughly percentage wise. So if you think about how many mothers that have walked away and out of the lives of their children, very few. You can probably estimate that the same amount as fathers have done so, but you probably know a lot more fathers that are absent than mothers, and that difference there is men that would very much like to be a part of their children's lives, but are unable to.
Sure. Well, statistically, men are much more likely to have jobs that prevent them from being with their kid more frequently, more likely to be in prison, more likely to be dead, killed on a job.
And
So,
yeah, you'd ask why, and the reason why, in my opinion, and there's a couple of different theories out there. I think when people go through this, and it's easy to, uh, we want to have reasons as to why, and we want them to be very concrete and black and white. It just makes things smoother in our minds. And while there is some truth to things like Title 4D, there is an incentivization there. I don't believe that any judges are sitting there consciously thinking, oh, I'm going to keep these children away from their dads so that Title 4D can send us money. But there is incentivization there that needs to go away. A lot of our movement will tell you that that's the whole reason that it's happening. I don't believe that. I believe that mostly it's just old social constructs that are taking time to go away, and we're trying to help push them out a little quicker.
well, there's definitely social constructs in place. One of the reasons why I got really involved with the Awesome Dad movement and started building up the Act to Dad movement is that just historically, every time I'd watch a show, listen to a radio program, fathers were never depicted as the hero. They're always depicted as the doofus or the dork or
Yep.
the mess up, when really I just think that's a bad message to send to children and to fathers. But before I go down that rabbit hole, Tom, could you just go into a little bit more detail on what Title 4D is? What does that mean? What is Title 4D?
So Title 4D is part of the Social Security Act, and it's really quite complicated. It goes into adoptions and into it basically is how money gets from the federal governments back out to the states through federal programs and so forth. Your welfare, those kinds of programs are all connected with Title 4D, and so there's a big web kind of weave there. In our To relate to us with child support, the way that works is that the more that the states are bringing in for child support, then the higher percentage of a reimbursement they receive. So if Texas is always at the top, they do really well. So Texas gets about 70% reimbursed. whereas other states, they don't maybe do as well as Texas. They only get maybe 40 or 50% reimbursed. And so while there's none of the states are actually making a profit, as a lot of people will tell you at times, I don't think they're making any like actual. They're always spending more than they're bringing in, but there is an incentive there to bring in as many as possible and to put them in jail or take their licenses, whatever gets that money in the door, so that you aren't losing as much money. Because you're not, as a state, paying as much money. Now the federal government's going to cover more of it for you.
Interesting. So typically in the when it comes to business and money and budgeting, you're also incentivized to meet that particular budget, or is there like a quota behind it as well? Like, hey, we need to reach X in child support so we don't get downgraded from 70 to 60%, anything like that involved?
It's not, and it's each state's a little bit different. It's not going to be an actual like level amount because some states like Alaska have very few population. So obviously our amount that we can bring in is going to be far less than Texas or California or something. So it is based off of a percentage of how much is owed in that state and how much is brought in comparison to that. And then they reimburse based on how much monies are spent in the reimbursing, or sending people out to get the money.
Interesting. I definitely can tell that that's a major, certainly an important part of everything. What is the Fathers' Rights Movement doing to try to adjust Title 4D or make it so that, because I think that the goal, in my understanding, the goal of the Fathers' Rights Movement is to get more 50-50 situations, right? Yeah. More 50-50. That's the goal. It's not to take kids away from their mothers. It's to give fathers a chance to be involved, right? Absolutely. So how are we making change to get to that 50-50?
So you asked, like, what are we, maybe you were going to ask me what we're doing with Title 4D, and we're not. There are some groups out there that that's what they're tackling. That's what they're going after. That's a federal level. The other federal one is the Violence Against Women Act, which is another one that really has consequences for us. And we don't oppose it. We and when you even speak out, try to start talking about how that one affects us, you get labeled. If you're against it, you must be for beating women. That's not quite the case. There's a lot more to it than that. But that one's a federal level as well. So we stay kind of away from those ones at the time being. We're concentrating on the 50-50, which is done at the state level. And a lot of the ones will kind of work out, at least the Title 4D, we figure will work out there, because once we get the majority of dads 50-50 custody, almost universally, the child support becomes reasonable. And I don't think anybody's necessarily against child support. It's unreasonable child support. There is times when it is so taxing upon these men that they can't even survive. They can't pay for their own well-being. And that unreasonable child support is something that's a real problem as well. Once we get closer to the 50-50 and men are able to spend time with their children again, each side will be covering their own expenses. Maybe there'll be a little bit of help there, some child support, but it won't be in the unreasonable level. And so the Title 4D won't matter as much at least to us. I think there's other problems with it as far as like adoption. I think that one is a real incentivization for adoption to happen through CPS and so forth. But that's there's other groups that are tackling that one as well. We can't tackle them all. We got to pick our battles.
Absolutely. One step at a time. And one of the challenges or the pushbacks that I've heard from different people that I've discussed this topic with is that by the Fathers' Rights Movement is basically pushing against women being mothers and taking kids away from mothers. But it to me, it doesn't seem like that. It seems like it's in the best interest of the child to have access to their father, right? So how does, and to me, almost there's a symbiosis between the Fathers' Rights Movement and the feminist movement, because we're all about equality in the gender. You mentioned it earlier. Your gender does not impact your ability to be an effective parent.
Right. So, the feminist movement, it was a large part of where we are right now. And it's kind of an interesting topic, because you look in the dictionary and the very description of it is equal and fairness and so forth. But it's a movement, and it's run by people, and it's an ideology that has subject to change and shifting of opinions and so forth as the leadership changes. So you've got different waves of feminism. And the second wave of feminism was in the 70s. And I think that was really a lot of that for most of them was about equality. And today, I think it's a little bit less. I think it's more about entitlement today, but it's not all of them. There's a mixture of people in there. And then you've got the ones from the 70s who still identify as being a feminist, and they are very much wanting equality. And they get very upset when you start talking about feminism in a negative manner because that's something that they relate to in that way, is being equal and fair. And it's just not anymore. And it's not that it's not by those individuals that claim to be feminists, but by the leadership. When you look at the organizations, the feminist organizations, there's not one of them that supports shared parenting. And the biggest one is now National Women Against, or National Women's Organization of Women. They've been basically our opponent, one of our largest opponents for the last 2 decades. Opposed us at every turn. And so while most people that identify maybe as feminists wouldn't agree with that, their leadership and their organizations are against, they're pushing against us. And I think that's where self-interest, it always kind of creeps in on movements and ideologies where how does this benefit us or how does this not benefit us? And they don't look at the bigger picture.
So I work in an office with several women who have kids, and the fathers are involved, but not involved as much, right? It's not a 50-50 situation. I think part of that's because the dads aren't necessarily desiring to be super, super involved, but they're involved. They're taking time. And their common thing that they say to me, against this anecdotal, is that they want their dads to be more involved. They want their fathers to be more responsibly involved, right? But to me, I just don't understand. I just don't get it. How can you claim you're doing what's best for the child while not supporting more 50-50 situations? Because to me, there are going to be many, many people, many different influences in a child's life over the years, but I don't think that anyone can replace a father's ability to instill confidence in a child. Statistically, children that don't have access to their fathers regularly have more drug issues, more depression, less able to fit in. I don't understand how anyone could be against fathers having more quality time with their kids. I just don't get that.
And so on the corporate level, where we were talking about like the organizations and stuff, they absolutely will take that stand that mothers are better in tune with their children. They're better capable of nurturing their children. They have the connection that forms in the womb, and then they have the breastfeeding that men just can't experience the same thing. And that's the position they take. When you get down to the individual levels, I don't think they take that position as often, although they certainly, there's ones that do. But I think even the ones that believe that they are, they would like to see the fathers get more involved, and the father just won't. That's true sometimes, but I think a lot of times that they are inadvertently doing gatekeeping, what we call gatekeeping. And what's interesting is there's the organization Fatherhood Initiative. I used to hate them. They would always put out the ads and the commercials that said, "Take time to be a dad today," and I'd hear those, at a time I'd love to be a dad, but I wasn't able to, and so it was very condescending. It was very it definitely stirred up a lot of emotions in me, and that was the position they'd always taken for years, was that dads are deadbeats and decided to stay out of their children's lives. Recently, I've been reconnecting with that group and looking at their literature and stuff, and they actually have literature now about maternal gatekeeping. So they are starting to shift their opinion and realize that it's not just the fathers. There are mothers that are doing gatekeeping. And a lot of these mothers don't even realize they're doing gatekeeping. They do want their fathers more involved. They just want them more involved on their terms. And they don't realize that what they're doing is their terms only. They're not realizing that they're cutting off the father, So that's, I think, a large part of it.
Yeah, certainly using children as a weapon is a devastating problem as well. What was the name of that organization again?
Fatherhood Initiative.
The Fatherhood Initiative.
It's funded by the U.S. government.
Gotcha. And it's funny. I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways of sending out a message, and some messages resonate with others better than some. But as long as I think you have the same end goal, I think we can end up getting there. And that's one of the things I think we've lost in our society. Everyone has the same end goal for the most part. We just have all these different ways of getting there. And that's where just argument and disharmony kind of occurs. What I would really like to see, if we talk about 50-50, what I would like to see is society as a whole looking at fathers as not a second-rate parent, but as a hero of a family, the hero of putting them back to being the hero. And that's something that I really fight for, is for dads to be the heroes, make them feel like a hero, make society see them as heroes. So that's something I would love to see. From your standpoint, Tom, what can fathers do, whether they're already alienated? Let's focus on those. The fathers that are alienated, what can they do? How can they be a positive contribution? How can they get more access to their kids? What advice would you give to a father who is going through this sort of a challenge?
So there's not a one piece of advice for any one father. There's so many different levels of alienation, to where I would say that seeing your child every other weekend is alienation. 4 days a month, you're certainly not getting the time to be a significant impact in their lives. But that's a huge difference than the ones that are every other weekend, and the mentality is that they're turning them against the dad, right? That's takes a whole nother level. And then you've got the ones that just cut off completely, where they haven't seen their child in 4 or 5 years. They don't even know where their child is or if the child's okay. So these different levels, and then the whole fight in the court, I mean, it's very stressful. It takes a lot on you. It costs a lot of money. It's very difficult. And so there's no right answer for one that'll fit everybody. I try to get people not to judge other people. There are times when these men, they have to walk away. They have to become what society would consider deadbeat dads. It comes down to a survival mechanism. They're gonna, if they continue on the path they are, they're gonna kill themselves. And they're gonna be no good to anybody. They have to take care of themselves first. And so sometimes that's a necessity for them to have to walk away. And then even within our movement, we have people that shun them or look down on them. But there's if they do that, they obviously have not been to the point I've been. They haven't seen things the way I've seen it, for sure. Once you've hit a point that you've actually considered that, it changes you in that regard. You're just like, wow. I mean, because these are your children. You love more than anything on earth. And for that thought to even cross your mind is you don't want to admit that, right? I mean, that's something like you don't want to admit that, but I've definitely been to that point, and I know a lot of men have. It's very, very taxing. So if you're not at that point, then the most important thing is to get back in the fight. To get in there, even if you can't afford a lawyer, learn how to do some pro se motions and start moving forward, trying to get that more time, more access, jump through whatever hoops the court asks you to do, and we've seen men be able to do that, where they had given up. They basically were every other weekend fathers, or some of them hadn't even seen their children in a few years, and now they are experiencing, they'll write me in. I just got one earlier last week that now has 50-50 custody. And 2 years ago he had none. So those are some powerful stories when I hear those. And you can't do it unless you're taking action and trying to get more access.
And being part of a community, I think, is key too. And one message I want to send out to every single father out there is that you have value and you deserve to be happy. So if you're ever having very negative thoughts or feeling down, I can tell you that the world is glad you're here. It may not seem that way. You may not feel that way all the time, but you definitely have value and definitely deserve to be happy. There's definitely been times in my life where I was like, this is as good as it gets. I don't deserve more, but I can tell you that you do, and you can contribute. Get involved with community programs. The Father's Rights Movement, definitely check them out. Even if you're not an alienated father, if you believe that dads are heroes of a household, you have to at least acknowledge and get involved. And I think it's really great what you've built up, Thomas. Really great.
Could I, you'd mentioned, about being in crisis, or about, do you have value and so forth. I'd like to give our crisis number for fathers that are down. We have a crisis number that's 24/7, and it's important. There's, when I was in that dark place, and I know a lot of the other fathers that when they get there, they won't call the National Suicide Hotline. It's just not something that is going to work out in their favor. I was always scared that they would basically use that against me. If they learned my name, they might put that on a public record somewhere, and then I might never see my kids. So, while I definitely was in a place where I should have been talking to somebody, I wouldn't call. And, a lot of those fathers are able to call us now. So I can't get that on here. Let me pull that up on the internet real quick. I had it on my phone. But let's go ahead and carry on, and I'll get that to you before we end. Or are we coming to an end?
Yeah. So I will absolutely post that phone number in the show notes. Let's see if we can't bring that up. I know on the Father's Rights Movement page, I actually have the crisis hotline right here. So that crisis hotline, if you're having trouble, if you're very concerned about putting it on record with the National Suicide Hotline, stay within a program or a movement that is a dadvocate. They're going to be a dadvocate for you. So the Father's Rights Movement has a crisis line. It is 907-312-5552. I will definitely put that in the show notes. That's 907-312-5552. So again, Thomas, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me and the Awesome Dad movement over here at Act-A-Dad. This has been a really great, very informational for me.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, very informational for me. I cannot wait to learn more about the Father's Rights Movement and what you guys are doing. I have a lot of respect for it. And I'm going to let you have the closing statement here. And I really appreciate you, Thomas.
Sounds good. So, one thing I'd like to say, I know that for the fathers that are in the darkness right now and they're in the midst of their divorce, it gets very expensive, as I said. They're not going to be able to make it to we have our first annual convention this year. And I would encourage anyone that can't afford to get to there to come. I've come down to rallies. The first one was in 2013. We did a rally in front of the White House. Actually, it was in front of Congress here in D.C. I've come down every year since for different events and so forth. And every year is phenomenal. We work with each other over the internet, but it's not the same as being face-to-face. When you get face-to-face with someone, it completely changes the dynamic and the relationship for the better. And so we really want to get as many people together as we can. We chose Vegas because they have cheap flights there at times of the year, and they have cheap food, cheap hotel rooms and stuff. We figured if we could get them there, that was the most important part, get as many people face to face as we can. We've got a really good lineup of a lot of people that are really knowledgeable, been in this movement for a long time, that are going to be speaking and on the expert panel. And we've got like 12 workshops. So it'll be a good experience for anybody that can make it.
Love it. That's going to be in late August. So if you've got some time in late August and you want to just take your relationship with your family and with the Father's Rights Movement to the next level, definitely check that out. And again, that's the Father's Rights Movement on Facebook or the Father's Rights Movement.us, TFRM.
Yes. Thank you.
Thomas, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I'm already looking forward to our next conversation because I felt this was really great. Really great.
I liked it too.